Today's big idea. Prioritization reframes U.S. strategy around one simple question. What protects American safety, prosperity, and social cohesion with finite resources? Lind and Press argue the answer isn't global leadership everywhere, but concentrating on the most urgent threat, preventing Chinese regional hegemony in Asia. That means narrowing goals, shifting forces, and asking allies to do more for their own defense. So a bit of a disclaimer, this is a summary of the article called Strategies of Prioritization by Jennifer Lind and Daryl G. Press in this past Foreign Affairs issue for July to August 2025. So with that, what is the lesson from this? So prioritization is a realist strategy for a post-primacy world. Focus on deterring the strongest rival in the most economically vital theater, Asia. Avoid overextension and right-size commitments elsewhere. The authors stress this isn't isolationism. It's a middle position between retreat and unlimited activism. The fiscal backdrop is unforgiving. Debt roughly equal to GDP, deficits more than 6% of GDP outside of war or deep recessions. And China is now an economic peer racing ahead in critical tech and military power. Strategy has to match that reality. So what's the evidence for this? First, why prioritize Asia or China now? The United States can't manage the world while competing with a rapidly strengthening China. Prioritizers condemn decades of global activism as overextension, argue that primacy is over, and warn that trying to sustain sacred alliances everywhere without resources is a recipe for failure. Competing with China will require focused attention. Secondly, from their point of view, Europe must shoulder more. Most NATO armies are underfunded and undersized, leaning on Washington for command and control and ISR, which is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Yet, Europe has the latent economic and tech advantages to rebuild. The strategy pushes a managed drawdown in Europe, and in the Ukraine war in a way that permits a U.S. pivot to Asia, reducing day one American forces on the continent, and making clear the United States is the last line, not the first, in Europe's defense. We talked about this specifically in an earlier episode on the hidden costs of European independence. Third, delivering the long-promised pivot. Prioritization accelerates preparations for a conflict in East Asia, especially the defense of Taiwan. By restoring the U.S. defense industrial base, maintaining export controls to deny Beijing cutting-edge systems, and countering China's regional economic pull with trade, tech, and development initiatives. Washington still coordinates and trains with allies, but expects higher allied contributions and plans to arrive later and with less in any European contingency. Fourth, the historical analogy and an iterative path. So, early containment was clumsy, too little asked of allies, too much reliance on nuclear weapons, and flirtation with preventive war. It improved over time. Prioritization, the authors argue, will need similar refinement, but the long-term orientation is set. Asia-focused and China-focused for years to come. Fifth, hard trade-offs and risks. Critics warn that shrinking the U.S. role could be geostrategic self-harm, and Lind and Press acknowledge the biggest risk, nuclear proliferation in Europe if U.S. credibility wanes. For example, if doubts about NATO nuclear sharing, talk of a European force, or even national arsenals. Still, they argue the 1990s model of U.S. global leadership is no longer viable. If countries must do more for their own security, some uncomfortable developments may be unavoidable. Sixth, the Asia cheap riding problem. So basically this means prioritization could inadvertently weaken Asian allies' incentives to spend more if Washington signals it'll handle China as priority one. So Japan long set near 1% of GDP on defense. Even with recent changes, it plans to only go up to 1.8% in 2025. Taiwan faces an existential threat yet spends less than 2.5%, which is around the global average. The authors argue the current administration's transactional posture may paradoxically help push allies to contribute more by credibly threatening to walk away if they don't. Lastly, resetting expectations. So by design, for decades, U.S. planning assumed rapid, large-scale reinforcement of Europe on day one. Prioritization flips that script to force European capacity building. The United States stays in NATO and stands by Article 5, but transfers some forces to Asia and accepts slower European reinforcement to remove the safety net that enabled shortfalls. In conclusion, Lind and Press aren't selling comfort, they're selling triage. In their view, a sober assessment of power, budgets, and threats demands concentrating on Asia and hard-coding Allied responsibility elsewhere. That means fewer speeches about indispensability, more discipline about where U.S. forces and dollars go, and a willingness to accept messy trade-offs to avoid catastrophic overreach. If this piqued your interest, you can go and read the essay yourself. The full argument is nuanced, historically grounded, and full of specifics on what a working prioritization strategy would entail. And for a little bit more about the authors, Jennifer Lind is an associate professor of government at Dartmouth College and an associate fellow at Chatham House, and an author of the book Autocracy 2.0. And then Daryl G. Press is a faculty director at the Davidson Institute for Global Security and professor of government at Dartmouth College. He's also an author of a book called The Myth of the Nuclear Revolution, Power, Politics, and the Atomic Age. So here's this, and I hope to see you guys on the next one.